We looked around, having spent so much time teaching about atrocities and warning signs, and we felt like we were canaries in a coal mine. Like we had to start speaking up because we could see the patterns forming. And we don't say that lightly. I want to be clear that I'm definitely among those people who, for decades, was saying everything isn't Hitler. Everybody, every comparison doesn't need to be to Nazi Germany. It's too easy a comparison, and it's lazy thinking to go that way. And certainly it's not the only patterns that we see. I mean, you've seen similar patterns in Hungary and in other settings that we've seen before. So it's the Holocaust, but it's also similar patterns that we've seen in other settings where things became more and more repressed. And there was a recognition that most of the time we have spent looking outward, not just EIHR, but many here in DC, many of our colleagues and partner organizations that have spent a lot of time thinking about what's happening in other places, but what are we thinking about what's happening right now and right here?
Genocide is a new word combining the Greek word genos meaning race or group, with the root of the Latin sidere meaning to kill.
Became interested in genocide because it happened so many times.
Power is all against one. Violence is the opposite. The extreme is one against all.
This is Not to Forgive, but to Understand, a podcast series discussing genocide studies with experts and those connected to its critical questions. I am Luis Gonzalez-Aponte, co-host with Sabah Carrim.
And what we're about is really to try to understand why evil happens, why there are perpetrations in genocidal scenarios and scenarios of mass atrocity. Not to forgive, but to understand.
Forgive, but to understand.
Not to forgive, but to understand.
In this episode, we speak with Kate English and Kim Klett of the Educators Institute for Human Rights. Kate has helped lead EIHR since its founding in 2011 and brings nearly 2 decades of public school teaching experience, along with extensive work in Holocaust education, peace education, and international teacher training. Kim Klett, EIHR's Deputy Executive Director, is an Arizona educator with long-standing experience in Holocaust education, teacher training, and anti-genocide work. Together we discuss what it takes to teach Holocaust, genocide, human rights, and post-conflict education responsibly, both in the United States and internationally. Thank you both so much for joining us today. For our listeners who may not know about the Educators Institute for Human Rights, it's an organization that partners with teachers around the world to develop classroom materials and provide training in Holocaust, human rights, and conflict education. Everything from curriculum guides to hands-on workshops in places like Rwanda, Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the United States, to help bring that work to life for our audience. I would like to start with you, Kate. Could you start us off by sharing an example of a training or a workshop you've been involved in, something that captures what EIHR's on-the-ground work looks like? And then, Kim, after that, I'd love to hear from you about EIHR's classroom resources, perhaps a curriculum or a set of materials you found especially meaningful for educators. But to start, Kate, please.
Thank you so much, Luis. Well, we really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you. EIHR began in 2011 with a single workshop in Rwanda at the request of the staff at the Kigali Genocide Memorial. They didn't have Holocaust education training there at the time, and 2 of our colleagues, the original founders of EIHR, were more than happy to oblige. So we have had programming in Rwanda in some form or other every year since then. There were a couple of years where we were pleased that staff on the ground were managing workshops in different regions across Rwanda. Currently, what we're most proud of in that project is the current cohort of what we're referring to as the EIHR Teacher Corps. And Kim and I met because we were part of what the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, well, they've renamed it several times, but it's a Museum Teacher Fellowship. And when Kim did it, it was the Mandel Fellowship, but now it's just the Museum Teacher Fellowship. And in both, what we had experienced in both of our cases is a year-long program, starting with a 4-day workshop in DC, then a year-long capstone style project in your community, and then returning to the museum to share that. And then once that's done, ostensibly you're available to the museum to contribute or to staff as a contractor on different projects. So we had found that such a profound experience. And the feedback we'd been getting over the years from the teachers in Rwanda was that they really wanted something more robust than even a 3 day. The complaint we always got on the workshop feedback was, we need more. And so after thinking about it quite a bit, and frankly, with the support of several wonderful donors, including the Jewish Claims Committee out of Germany, we were able to provide a similar program and it kept getting bumped because of COVID. So it was 2023 and 2024 is when it actually took place. So we had 15 teachers that had all participated in some EIHR program in years previous. So they had already had some solid experience in Holocaust education and genocide prevention and peace building education over the years. And then they also had to pass a language requirement, and our staff in Rwanda did a wonderful job of screening the applicants and determining a good balance of different curricular areas. So we had social studies teachers, English teachers, language teachers, character education teachers, all involved. And so they came for the 4 day workshop. We had scholars and activists and museum personnel all engaging with the teachers. Plus Kim, I just want to give her an extra special shout out because she did a number of really terrific individual workshops across the 4 days. And then they were assigned to do a capstone project themselves. They had to take the time to identify what that might be. Took the year to do it. We came back. We did 3 days training to follow up. And then when we asked them what now, because we really are comfortable with ambiguity of outcome. We really want the lead to be from the partners on the ground, not us coming in and saying what we think they should do. So after we had finished the entire program, we took a whole session toward the end and said, so what happens now? Do you think we should do another cohort? Is there some other project you think we ought to be pursuing? And they came pretty quickly to the decision. They felt that there was a lack of materials in the communities of the schools where they taught. So the adults, anyone under 31 years old at this point, wasn't alive. And so that's a lot of young teachers. But there also are a lot of adults above that age whose experience of what happened in 1994 during the genocide against the Tutsi, it was very confined to their immediate location. So I know that many times if you are a person of an experience, your understanding of it is quite specific. And so they wanted to get the broader view of events across time, the context for it, and so on and so forth, and include some elements of Holocaust education for the people in the villages and school communities. And they needed it to be in Kinyarwandan, not in French, not in English, but to make it really accessible. So they've been working on that straight since that time. So it's been about a year and a half now, Kim, about?
Yes, yes.
They've been working with our curriculum director, Carrie Olson, and closely with Kim as well to develop a tool. It's kind of a booklet, I think is the best way to describe it. Something that is tangible, but also lightweight, manageable. You don't need the internet to access it, but it's not a big, heavy volume to be lugging around. And so it's something that they can share readily in their communities. So that's in the final draft phase. And I'm proud to say that our lead team member there, David, he's already been meeting with the Ministry of Unity in Rwanda, and we've gotten their the first round of endorsement. I don't know that it's official yet, but they're certainly enthusiastic about the program. And that's the teachers led that. So that really is characteristic of the work that we hope to do.
Thank you. And you touched on several implications of post-conflict education that I would love to talk about more today. And to bring it to Kim, can you expand on um, these materials for educators in these places? Kate alluded to the project of that Rwandan teachers on the ground are working on this guide. Can you expand on both this project and also past projects that the EIHR has engaged in to provide material resources for educators to use?
Yes, we always want to give them quality resources. And like Kate mentioned that they don't know, depending on where we are, they don't always have steady internet access and things like that. So bringing a lot of actual print materials, which is always fun with luggage and interesting, but we bring those to them. And so, we've partnered with USHMM to do this, and they've been very generous with giving us, timeline card sets, for example, to share with the teachers because we know what an asset those are in our classrooms and being able to bring things like that. But then it's also been like what Kate's saying with Rwanda, for them to be able to create something. And so in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we formed a team of teachers who wrote a guide for teachers, and they created lesson plans and they worked on these for again about a year, meeting together people from different areas of Bosnia, getting together on a weekend, writing these lesson plans, piloting them, even having some of us US teachers pilot them in our classrooms, to get some feedback on those. And then now being able to, have this second edition and present that with these really great resources that work for their needs in their classrooms, but again, go beyond that. And then I think, we've also been able to create lessons. We worked with the Seven Foundation. We were contacted by them to create lesson plans for their Imagine Reflections on Peace work, which is a book, an exhibit, a video, it's all kinds of things. And we, as a team, we had two of us on staff for each of the 6 countries that are represented. We wrote lesson plans for those, and really worked hard to, again, incorporate what we thought was meaningful for teachers. There are some very common aspects of it, like each lesson of the 6 countries, each one has timeline activity. It has a photo analysis activity. And it ends with the idea of, because the Seven Foundation is a group of photojournalists who have worked in wartime and conflict, and they, have seen the worst of society. Their mission with this project was to go back to those areas and say, okay, well, what does peace look like now? Understanding that we have this very, oh gosh, pie in the sky kind of idea of, what peace looks like, and oh, everything's wonderful afterwards, and it's messy. It doesn't always look the same, and it doesn't always work. And so what does that look like? And really also putting it toward the forefront for students of, again, these terrible things happen, but there can be peace and it can work in these situations, and having them think about that as well. So it's not all looking at the destruction and the horrors of these events.
I'd just like to add that we've definitely benefited from the generosity of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. We've also had other partners that have donated materials and time, including the Anne Frank House. They are official partners with us for our work in the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example. We've worked with the Anti-Defamation League to use some of their anti-Semitism training materials. With Kim, who am I forgetting now? I know there's a whole list, and I'm going to leave somebody off,
I know those are at the forefront.
Yes, USIP and the let's see, the IEP, the Institute for Economics and Peace has contributed materials and training as part of our workshops. So we've really benefited from the largesse of a lot of terrific international partners that are supporting what the teachers are doing as well.
Yeah, and staying on this international note, Kate and Kim, You've both worked directly with educators in places like you mentioned Rwanda, Cambodia, societies that experienced genocide and mass violence within living memory. And you both alluded to this earlier. For some listeners, it might be counterintuitive. Why would communities that survive these events need training in genocide or Holocaust education at all? In your experience, what makes this work necessary in post-conflict settings? Is it a response to the risks of denial or distortion? Or is it more about the role that human rights education plays in reconstruction, healing, and this human development side?
I don't think that's an either or proposition. I think it's both. I think that what we really do consider that education is a critical piece of restoring civil society in the wake of conflict. And that will take different forms depending on what that resolution looks like. We also, you don't want to be, I don't want to seem as if it's a shallow comparison because we're really careful about making comparisons, especially comparisons of pain. But there are predictable patterns in histories of genocides and atrocities that can be beneficial to think about when we talk about prevention. So things like the use of propaganda and the othering of groups and those sorts of things that I think most of us, anyone who's listening to this, is probably aware of. And so looking for those patterns and sometimes seeing it through the eyes of someone else's experience gives people the space they need to reflect on their own without it being so immediate, without, and so looking at the history of the Holocaust, it's never a direct relationship. And we are adamant that we don't want to diminish or exaggerate or romanticize anyone's experience of atrocity. But there's also commonality that can be found that's quite moving. When we see teachers from Bosnia working together with teachers from Rwanda, and Kim and I can sit and listen to these conversations and know that while America has a history that we're grappling with of our own, their experiences in that more immediate setting that you talked about. So, if you have the children of perpetrators from your village, you're the teacher in the classroom, I don't have experience with that, and I wouldn't want to try and project what I think might be a good idea. However, the teacher in Rwanda and the teacher in Bosnia can definitely connect and offer each other support. We also have had circumstances. There was the first workshop we did in Democratic Republic of Congo. First of all, nobody's contradicted me on this, and I've asked around quite a bit. I believe we're the first organization to do Holocaust and genocide prevention education in DRC. But we had a teacher who wrote in the comments afterwards that he'd been a history teacher for many, many years. He'd never heard of the Holocaust. He never knew that it happened. And not only that, but sometimes a society or a community, there's a sense of isolation and shame around their history. And there's a belief that they're the only society or community that's experienced it. And so the notion that there could be other communities grappling with a similar history can provide a sense of connectedness that can be supportive. So that's been a surprise as we've gone. That was not something we ever expected, but it has happened on multiple occasions.
That shared experience is crucial, especially if we look at the broader literature surrounding post-conflict reconstruction. Of course, Séverine Autesserre did a lot of work in the DRC, in the Eastern DRC, and she speaks a lot about how you go in not from a outside point of view, going ahead and imposing a kind of reconstruction plan, but necessarily see what the pre-existing, let's say, human capital of knowledge is and can be shared. So, as you pointed out before, a similar situation that I've come across just through my reading of the literature as well is the concern for reintegration of militants and former combatants into the military that comes after, but yet not so much concern from the broader perspective for child soldiers, the reintegration of child soldiers into an education system. This is a real issue that many people have to face. And I want to focus on the kind of constraints that educators in these places have, as well as constraints that teachers here in the US face, which that teachers may feel that they would love to include Holocaust and genocide education, but the reality is that they're overwhelmed. They're preparing students either for benchmarks and standardized testing in the US, or coordinating with team requirements, or facing real material inequities on the ground. And yet, both of you became museum teacher fellows with the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, a recognition that's given to educators who had already taken meaningful initiative in this area. Now, when you look at your own time in the classroom, what made you carve out the space for this work, despite those constraints? Because I'm sure that those same constraints that educators today feel in the US were the same then. Was it the access to resources, or personal experience, or something early in your teaching that sparked that commitment that drives you both to today?
So I'll give you two quick answers, but I do want to pass this one on to Kim. Um, the first thing I'll note is that many people in the general population don't realize that English teachers, not history teachers, are the ones doing most of the Holocaust education. History teachers are constrained by curriculum maps that dictate what time periods they're supposed to cover in a semester, for example. And if they're in a, if it's October 25th, then we must be on page 74 of the history book teaching about X, right? So if history teachers get a day to teach about the Holocaust as a discrete topic, that could be fortunate. On the other hand, for English teachers, we're teaching the skills. So when I was teaching 8th grade, for example, I could teach writing, I could teach grammar, I could teach literature, all through Holocaust literature. To the other question, and this is one where I know Kim will have something to say about her experiences in her classroom. But I also want to mention that in Bosnia, that was a big question. There still is quite a lot of tension around the use of the word genocide if you're working with teachers that are representative of the Republic of Srpska. And so because there has been an issue with recognizing the fact that, for example, that genocide took place in Srebrenica. So there can be an opportunity to, that's another place where teaching about something other than your own experience can afford an opportunity to have a conversation that you might not otherwise have. And that was a lot of what the Bosnian teachers from all parts of Bosnian culture and society, we had team members that was representative. And they all had that concern. How do we teach about this one? How do you teach about what you can't talk about? And so that was reflected in the book. Kim, I'm going to toss it to you.
Yeah, I think for me, yeah, you're right. As an ELA teacher, I had all the time in the world, it seemed, to teach this topic. And for me, it started with a class I took at Arizona State University. I'd finished my master's, thinking about working on a PhD. So I went back. I didn't get the PhD, but started taking some classes. And the first one I took was called Holocaust Literature. And when I was about halfway through the course, I thought, why aren't we, sharing this with students at the high school level? Because like Kate said, our kids really get a few days, if that. And so I went through the process of getting my class. I'd been teaching about 10 years at that time, got the class approved and started teaching it. And it was very popular. I mean, kids are interested in this history. And what I found over the years, the dynamics of my school changed a lot. And what I found is that the more kids I got who were, what we'd label, I guess, immigrants, or I hate the word minorities, but they'd be labeled that way. And those were the kids who really understood this, like they got it on another level, and they were so interested and made really interesting connections to the history not only of the Holocaust, but also of other atrocities and other genocides. And so it just kind of continued to build from there, I think, for me. And yeah, having that luxury of time, I had a semester long class. Later, it was a year-long class. And yeah, I mean, you do have a lot more time and you can cover all of the standards that you're supposed to cover and still use literature and primary source materials and things from, these histories. So it's I think when we do programs, we're finding it's at least half and half, if not sometimes more heavy with the ELA teachers than the history and social studies teachers.
So bringing this back to the United States, Kim, you've taught Holocaust and genocide studies in Arizona high schools for many years, during a time when the state enacted a mandate requiring instruction on the Holocaust. From your perspective as a classroom educator, how did that mandate shape teaching practice in Arizona? And now that it's been on the books for a few years, what has the follow-through look like? What's working and what gaps still remain for teachers who are on the ground?
Yeah, so I think, the response I got from a lot of teachers was, well, why do we need a mandate? It's already in the standards. I already teach about it. But it was, again, that quality of education and how much. And when the mandate first passed, it was just that in Arizona, at least, that students had to learn about the Holocaust and other genocides at least once in junior high and once in high school. It was very vague. Since then, it's gotten a little less vague, and they've put days. That it has to be at least 3 days, 3 class periods in each of those levels. But I think there's still a lot of ambiguity. I think it's a start, and we're providing through there's a task force. The Phoenix Holocaust Association is working hard on it, to really provide the training for teachers, because I think that's part of what's missing. I think there's also some disconnect because, a lot of times, just as we were talking about it being taught in the ELA classroom, so some social studies teachers might say, oh, English is taking care of it. And then there might be ELA teachers who are saying, well, they get that in history, and then it doesn't get taught at all. And so I think there's some disconnect there. It depends on the district, a lot of variables, as you can imagine. And so I think that's an issue. There's also, just like we see in many of the states with the mandate, it's unfunded. And so, you have to work with nonprofits like PHA, Martin Springer Institute, different entities who will provide that education for teachers and give it to them at no cost or very low cost. And so it's there's a lot to be done. I think it's a good start, but there's a lot to be done still with the mandates.
And that's part of the reason we've been so thrilled to work so much with the Martin Springer Institute. Both EIHR and the Martin Springer Institute are members of the USHMM. It's the Community of Holocaust Education Centers, or it's called the CHECK program. And so even as much as Kim and I were engaged as individual teachers in the Museum Teacher Fellowship Program, we're very excited that EIHR as an institution continues to partner with the museum in that way.
Still staying on the United States and zooming out just a little bit to include general problems that educators are facing here in the United States. EIHR is also a member of the Right to Learn Coalition, the R2L. I know our listeners are going to be having an earful of abbreviations today, but this coalition brings together organizations across the United States to protect students' access to safe and inclusive education. And this work sits in a broader national context. The United States does not guarantee education as a federal right in the Constitution, and it is not a signatory of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, meaning that children's access to education depends heavily on state level protections rather than national guarantees. And as I was preparing for this interview on the EIHR's website, we see a quote by W.E.B. Du Bois saying, quote, saying, quote, of all the civil rights for which the world has struggled and fought these last 5,000 years, the right to learn is undoubtedly the most fundamental, close quote. And to this point, could both of you touch on EIHR's role within that coalition? And based on the work you do, how would you describe the current state of children's access to education in this country, the United States, whether we're talking about safety, inclusivity, or simply the ability to learn without barriers?
The R2L coalition was formed uh, when members of our board of directors and members of our staff that are US based, we looked around having spent so much time teaching about atrocities and warning signs, and we felt like we were canaries in a coal mine. Like we had to start speaking up because we could see the patterns forming. And we don't say that lightly. I want to be clear that I'm definitely among those people who for decades was saying everything isn't Hitler, everybody, every comparison doesn't need to be to Nazi Germany. It's too easy a comparison, and it's lazy thinking to go that way. And certainly it's not the only patterns that we see. I mean, you've seen similar patterns in Hungary and in other settings that we've seen before. So it's the Holocaust, but it's also similar patterns that we've seen in other settings where things became more and more repressed. And there was a recognition that most of the time we have spent looking outward, not just EIHR, but many here in DC, many of our colleagues and partner organizations that have spent a lot of time thinking about what's happening in other places, but what are we thinking about what's happening right now and right here? And that was the impetus to form the Right to Learn Coalition. We do have on the website for teachers links to materials from the partner organizations and ways to do things like connect with PEN America or Every Library. If you have book bans happening, those are all available as part of the resources for teachers. The primary thing that we're doing is really creating community. I know you've already looked at it, but members of R2L include Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the African American Policy Forum in New York City. I know I can't list them all. It's quite impressive to listen to see the concern and the investment back in the United States communities from so many organizations that we think of as being global. The Human Rights Campaign is part of it. I'm going to forget. It's a long list. It's on the website. And the main thing is coming away with it, thinking how do we support teachers? How do we support communities, school boards, librarians, as institutions, and idea sharing, resource sharing, and we've watched because we've been formed. We started, I believe, in 2022. And we've watched a lot of things happen over time. There were some of us who thought that we might sunset at a certain point. And of course, events being what they are, it's only become more important. I will point specifically to my concern about all of the dissolution of elements of the Department of Education, including the Civil Rights Division. And in fact, I first learned of the quote you mentioned from the head of the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Education at a workshop that I attended. And now they're no longer there. So we host the Right to Learn Coalition, which means that our Zoom, we host the Zoom meetings, but we also host the materials and resources on our website. Our board president, John Heffernan, had a big role to play in getting this started. And we're grateful to him for having that kind of prescient stewardship of human rights in the United States. One of the things that we did in the Right to Learn Coalition was hold focus groups in 2024 to start hearing directly from teachers. We feel our role in the broader community is to make sure that we're keeping the teacher's experience in the forefront of these conversations about how we respond. And we had a variety of experiences shared in those focus groups. Everything from, someone who was on there saying, oh gosh, I thought it was tough here. And now listening to other people, clearly I should be counting my blessings. And we've heard from folks who We had to be very careful about how we set up the focus groups because we had folks who had to decline to even be involved because they were concerned that through technology someone could connect them to R2L through their computer usage. So we had some teachers who just, nope, I can't do this. And so it was everything from one extreme to the other. But it included folks who have, had to take books off their shelves and then get them reviewed, and whether or not they came back again. That changes over time, and with the turnover of school boards, this most recent election, as I understand it, school boards across the country saw a swing back. School boards across the country saw a swing back to more traditional school board settings and less external insertion into the school board process. And so it's kind of reaching an equilibrium again that we hope will sustain. We also know, we know folks who are school librarians, one person in particular who actually had to step down from his position because the restrictions being placed on him, he felt he could not support it any longer in a rural Pennsylvania setting. So, and I'm from Pennsylvania, I love Pennsylvania. So it was disappointing to me to see that this person felt like they were driven to that decision. And I also felt like it was a brave decision on his part, because we want to be in there and fighting the fight, right? We also spoke with a teacher who got driven out of the classroom for having, the perception was that her work was too much DEI. I think like everyone else, we've felt like there's a bit of a fire hose of things happening, and we're trying to keep up with what it's meant for our work internationally, and the things that it has meant domestically. What I will say is that the work with the African American Policy Forum has been a significant piece of R2L's progress, and listening to how we can think about anti-racist education. We also are very concerned about Asian and Pacific Islanders, and where they fit in, often overlooked Native American populations. And of course, we were talking about the need to really be considering what's happening to students who are Latina or Latinx, that their experiences even before the ICE events that are happening now. That's another thing about the Department of Education and the declaration of English as the national language. And what does that mean to dual language programs that have seen so much success in ushering kids into full use of English language, and the ability to be able to assess their learning and be able to demonstrate the progress that they're making. So, there's a lot happening, and we don't pretend that we can address all of it, but we do keep a community and we do look at the things that we can do, and follow through on those.
Right. And Kim, do you have something that you can elaborate on, again, this aspect of children's access to education in this country? Are there also, you touched on the mandate in Arizona related to Holocaust education. What does it mean for us to be relying on this kind of legislation to get through to the children as well?
What I'm seeing, when I am working with teachers, is fear. And, they're afraid to touch any topic that might, raise the concerns of any of their parents. And I've seen, just this summer working with some teachers, um, it's crazy. Some of the things that they're facing, like things I was like, wait, what? Like you can't be serious. And they totally were. And so, I retired 2 years ago and I never faced any of that. I might have the occasional parent ask for their student to opt out of a book. But it was very rare. And I never had a problem with that. I'd give them an alternate book. We'd work on that together and, it was fine, but not like what we're seeing now. And so I think that's the need is to give teachers a space to to feel safe, to feel connected to other teachers who are going through these same things, to have an outlet at least. where they can share. And I think that's a huge piece of that. But yeah, I mean, the fear is really driving, even though, you can say, well, hey, tell your administrator, tell the parents, there's a mandate, we have to teach this. And they're like, it doesn't matter. I hear that sometimes. It doesn't matter. They don't care. And where there is actual denial sometimes on the part of some parents. And, you'd hear that once in a blue moon in the past, and now it seems like it's much more prevalent. So that's the biggest thing I'm seeing with the teachers that I work with is just that fear.
Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear from both of you um, regarding any ongoing or upcoming EIHR projects that you think our listeners should keep an eye on, whether new trainings, curriculum releases, or research initiatives. And for everyone listening who wants to explore more, I encourage you to visit the EIHR's YouTube channel, which is EIHR Educators Institute for Human Rights, where there's a growing collection of lectures, webinars, presentations, especially including the recent Arts and Human Rights series, which I immensely enjoyed. It's an excellent way to follow their work and, of course, follow the work that they're doing in real time. So, what should we be looking out for next?
Well, the work that's the most active right now that we're very excited about is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And our team lead there, Julson Kavakirwa, has been just amazing. He throws himself heart and soul into what he's doing. And he's organized a series of ongoing workshops with teachers, but also these days at schools where they're having a whole experience around Holocaust education and the Anne Frank's diary. That's been, and that's an outcrop of directly from requests from teachers in DRC. And they've developed this over time in partnership with both EIHR and the Anne Frank House. And it's just astonishing to me how far the reach has gone. He's doing it one village at a time, one school at a time. They had been getting into some areas that we typically think of as being too much in conflict to be holding these sorts of workshops, but we've seen them happening in places like Beni and up around Goma. It's happening in a combination of remote and in-person events, but they're getting it. They're making it happen. They're getting they made a training manual for teachers, largely based on the Holocaust education guidelines from both the USHMM and from IRA. But really adapted to the needs and desires of teachers in DRC. That's, I think, the work that's the most exciting internationally at the moment. And Kim, I'd love for you to talk more about the webinars. We were really thrilled to host the IAG, the International Association of Genocide Scholars Education Conference. And all of those sessions are available now on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, so every year we pick a theme. This year, our theme is literature by and about young people in conflict. And so we're going to have, so far we have set up Alexander Zapruder, author of Salvaged Pages. We have a Bosnian author who's going to join us as well, Japanese internment camps, all different topics, again, by and about young people. So their voices or their experiences. And we'll be meeting with these folks online. If you can't catch the webinars, they're typically on Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern time. We always have the recordings, like you said, on the YouTube channel, and you can go back, and we've done some really great ones. I'm really happy with the series over the years. We've been doing it for quite a few years now, and just some really interesting people we've had the opportunity to chat with.
Kim also hosts, she's been experimenting with a book group. And that's a more intimate, it's not something that we record. It's a more intimate experience of a shared topic. And this Sunday we have one coming up, and it's focused on Northern Ireland, which happens to be it's the experience that brings me to the field. So I'm excited to sit in on it. Do you want to say a little bit about that, Kim, even though if this doesn't go out before Sunday, it'd be good.
Yeah. It's something we're doing quarterly, so we didn't want to inundate people. I know there are so many book groups. I'm in many of them as well, and it can be daunting sometimes. So we just do them once a quarter. But yeah, I mean, we really invite interested, parties to come and join us. Like Kate said, it's very informal. The last one we did was a book by a Cambodian author called Slow Noodles. And we just kind of have a discussion about the books and, we don't like, I run it, but I'm not the expert on it or anything. It's just an open discussion for all of us. And kind of the fun thing about, if there's a fun thing about it with Say Nothing, is it's a book, but it's also a really good series. I'm watching it on Hulu right now, and it's nice to have both, so people can join if they have watched the series, they can join if they've read the book, you can join if they're just interested, and we just have this nice little intimate group that discusses it online together.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much. We appreciate your work immensely with the EIHR, and I'm excited to share this with our audience. This was Not to Forgive, but to Understand, with our guests, Kate English and Kim Klett. To our listeners, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more discussions.